If you're lying awake right now, struggling to quiet your racing mind, you're about to discover something that might surprise you. Tonight, we're going to explore why a single day with the Mongol Nomads would probably be the end of you, but told in the most soothing, sleep-inducing way possible. No galloping horses, no dramatic conquests, just the gentle reality of how incredibly demanding life was for the people who created history's largest contiguous empire through their mastery of survival skills you couldn't imagine acquiring. Over the next few hours, we'll walk through a complete day in the year 1240, living alongside a Mongol family on the vast steppes of Central Asia. You'll experience the countless ways that nomadic life would challenge, overwhelm, and quite possibly defeat even the most adaptable modern person. This isn't about warfare or empire building. It's about the mundane, everyday skills that made simply surviving another day on the steppes a remarkable achievement that required knowledge passed down through generations. By the way, if this helps you fall asleep tonight, make sure to subscribe to Past Bedtime. We create historical sleep stories regularly, and our growing community of insomniacs from around the world can tell you, these gentle journeys through history really work. Before we begin, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Whether it's 2 a.m. in Chicago, midnight in Manchester, or 3 a.m. in Melbourne, you're part of our global family of fellow night owls finding peace through history. So settle into your comfortable bed, adjust your pillow, and let yourself drift into a world where your biggest daily challenge wasn't your morning commute or coffee order, but reading the subtle signs of weather, grass quality, and animal behavior that determined whether your family would survive another week on the endless grasslands. Now, let's begin our gentle exploration of why life with the Mongol Nomads would probably defeat you before the morning milking was done. The first faint light of dawn touches the endless horizon of the Mongolian steppes, and you're immediately faced with your first impossible challenge of the day. You need to wake up, but waking up for a Mongol nomad isn't just about opening your eyes. It's about instantly assessing dozens of environmental factors that will determine your family's survival strategy for the entire day ahead. Before you even sit up in your felt bedding inside the gur, your nomadic family members are already reading signs that you wouldn't even notice. The quality of the morning light tells them about cloud formations they can't yet see. The direction and strength of the wind carries information about weather patterns developing hundreds of miles away. The sounds made by the animals or the absence of certain sounds communicate vital intelligence about the condition of the grassland, the presence of predators, and the mood of the livestock that represents your family's entire wealth. You try to listen for these crucial morning signals, but your modern ears, accustomed to the constant background noise of civilization, can't distinguish between the subtle variations in wind sound that tell an experienced nomad whether today will bring gentle breezes or potentially dangerous storms. The difference between a wind that promises good grazing weather and one that warns of approaching harsh conditions is measured in tiny variations of pitch and intensity that would take years of constant attention to learn to recognize. Even the way the felt walls of your gur move in the morning breeze carries information. The experienced nomads around you can tell from these movements whether the gur is properly secured for changing weather conditions, whether the guy ropes need adjustment, and whether the family should prepare for a potential emergency move to more sheltered ground. But reading environmental signs is just the beginning of your morning challenges. As you struggle to make sense of the complex sensory information that determines steppe survival, you realize that every member of your nomadic family, including small children, possesses knowledge about animal behavior that you couldn't acquire in years of study. The horses that represent the foundation of Mongol nomadic life are not just transportation. They're complex partners in survival whose moods, health, and capabilities must be assessed and managed constantly. Before you've even fully awakened, Your nomadic family members are evaluating each horse in their herd through subtle observation of posture, movement, and interaction patterns. A horse that stands with its weight shifted slightly differently than usual might be developing lameness that could become serious within days. A mare that positions herself differently relative to the other horses might be entering a phase of her reproductive cycle that will affect her behavior and performance. A stallion that holds his head at a slightly different angle might be detecting scents or sounds that indicate the proximity of wild animals, other horse herds, or human activity that could represent either opportunity or threat. You watch your nomadic family making these assessments with the casual efficiency of people checking the time, but when you try to observe the horses yourself, you see only animals standing in a field. The subtle postural cues, the barely perceptible changes in ear position, the minute variations in how the animals distribute their weight, all of these crucial indicators are invisible to your untrained eyes. Even more challenging is understanding how these individual horse assessments combine into decisions about herd management strategy for the day. Should the horses be moved to different grazing areas? Should certain animals be kept closer to the gur for monitoring? Should the family prepare for rapid movement if the horse's behavior suggests approaching weather or other challenges? These decisions must be made quickly, based on information you can't perceive, using judgment developed through lifelong experience that you couldn't replicate. And the consequences of poor decisions aren't just inconvenience. They're potential death for the family and the animals they depend on for survival. But horses are only one element of the complex animal management system that dominates nomadic life. Your Mongol family also depends on sheep, goats, cattle, and camels, each species requiring different types of knowledge and presenting different challenges for daily management. The sheep that provide wool, meat, and milk have their own complex behavioral patterns that must be understood and anticipated. Sheep are vulnerable to predators, sensitive to weather changes, and prone to panic reactions that can scatter the flock across miles of steppe terrain. Managing sheep successfully requires understanding group dynamics, predicting weather impacts, and maintaining constant vigilance against the wolves, wild dogs, and human raiders who view sheep flocks as easy targets. Your nomadic family members can read the mood of the sheep flock through dozens of subtle indicators. The way the animals cluster together, the frequency and tone of their vocalizations, the patterns of their movement as they graze. They know which individual sheep are natural leaders that the flock will follow, which animals are likely to cause problems, and which members of the flock are showing early signs of illness or injury that require attention. You try to observe the sheep with the same analytical attention, but you see only a group of similar-looking animals wandering around eating grass. The behavioral nuances that provide crucial management information are completely invisible to you, and even when family members point out specific indicators, you struggle to understand what you're supposed to be seeing. The goats present different challenges that require different types of expertise. Goats are more independent and intelligent than sheep, but they're also more likely to wander away from the flock, more capable of getting into dangerous situations, and more difficult to control when they decide to pursue their own agenda. Managing goats requires a combination of animal psychology, physical agility, and strategic thinking that nomadic children develop through years of practice, but that would challenge even experienced modern animal handlers. The cattle that provide milk, meat, and leather are powerful animals whose cooperation must be earned and maintained through complex relationships that combine respect, authority, and understanding of bovine social structures. A cow that decides not to cooperate with milking, herding, or handling procedures can create serious problems for the entire family, and preventing these problems requires insight into cattle psychology that goes far beyond anything most modern people have ever needed to develop. And then there are the camels, creatures so uniquely adapted to harsh environments and so fundamentally different from familiar domestic animals that working with them successfully requires knowledge that seems almost mystical to outsiders. Camels are intelligent, stubborn, capable of holding grudges, and absolutely essential for survival in the desert regions that nomadic families must sometimes traverse. Understanding how to load a camel properly, how to read its mood and physical condition, how to motivate it to cooperate with necessary tasks, and how to prevent the potentially dangerous behaviors that frustrated camels can exhibit requires expertise that takes decades to develop and that depends on cultural knowledge passed down through generations of nomadic families. As you struggle to comprehend the basics of multi-species animal management, you realize that successful nomadic life requires you to function as a veterinarian, animal psychologist, weather forecaster, range management specialist, and security expert simultaneously, all while maintaining the physical fitness and mental alertness necessary to spend 12 to 16 hours a day in the saddle under challenging conditions. But even if you somehow possessed all the necessary animal management skills, you'd still face the challenge of understanding and participating in the complex social relationships that make nomadic life possible. Mongol nomadic society was built on intricate networks of family relationships, tribal affiliations, and mutual obligations that determined everything from daily work assignments to major decisions about migration routes and seasonal camping locations. Your position within these social networks would determine which animals you were responsible for managing, which family members you were expected to assist with their tasks, which decisions you were entitled to participate in, and which resources you could call upon when you faced difficulties or emergencies. But understanding your place in these social networks requires knowledge of genealogies, tribal histories, marriage relationships, and political affiliations that extend back generations and across vast geographical areas. The seemingly simple question of whose sheep you should help manage on any given day might depend on complex calculations involving family relationships, reciprocal obligations, seasonal traditions, and current political dynamics within the broader tribal community. Even more challenging is learning to navigate the subtle protocols that govern social interaction within nomadic communities. The way you approach another person, the order in which you address different family members, the tone of voice you use when discussing various topics, the physical gestures you make during conversations, all of these elements of social interaction follow rules that are so deeply embedded in nomadic culture that they're rarely discussed explicitly but are absolutely essential for maintaining harmonious relationships. Violating these social protocols, even accidentally, could damage relationships that your survival depends on. In a nomadic community where everyone must work together effectively under stressful conditions, social friction can have consequences that extend far beyond hurt feelings or awkward conversations. The morning light grows stronger across the steppes, and you begin to understand that the challenges you're already struggling with represent only the beginning of what a typical day with Mongol nomads would require. You haven't yet attempted to participate in the actual work of nomadic life. The riding, herding, milking, equipment maintenance, weather monitoring, and dozen other essential tasks that fill every waking hour for people whose survival depends on their ability to work effectively in one of the world's most demanding environments. The vast grassland that stretches to every horizon looks peaceful and even beautiful in the morning light, but you're beginning to realize that this apparent emptiness is actually filled with subtle information, hidden dangers, and complex relationships that experienced nomads navigate with unconscious skill, but that would require years of dedicated learning for an outsider to begin to understand. The gentle morning breeze carries scents that tell stories about the health of the grassland, the proximity of water sources, the recent passage of other herds, and the likelihood of weather changes that could affect the day's activities. These scents are a constant stream of environmental intelligence that guides nomadic decision-making. But to your modern senses, they're just pleasant smells that remind you of being outdoors. The sounds of the steppe, the calls of birds, the movements of small animals, the subtle variations in wind patterns, create an acoustic landscape that experienced nomads read like a newspaper. But that sounds to you like generic nature sounds that might be pleasant for relaxation but don't seem to carry any specific information. Even the quality of the light, the patterns of the clouds, and the behavior of insects provide data that influences nomadic planning and strategy, but you lack the knowledge and experience necessary to interpret these natural signals in ways that could guide practical decision-making. As you sit in the morning stillness, surrounded by a nomadic family whose members are effortlessly processing dozens of streams of environmental and social information while preparing for another day of complex survival challenges, you begin to understand why nomadic life would defeat most modern people before the sun reached its peak. The skills required for successful nomadic life aren't just different from modern abilities. They represent completely different ways of relating to the natural world, to animals, to weather patterns, to geographical features, and to other human beings. These relationships are based on knowledge systems that take generations to develop and that depend on constant practice under real-world conditions where mistakes can have serious consequences. The nomadic family around you possesses collective knowledge about animal behavior, weather prediction, grassland management, navigation, equipment maintenance, food preservation, medical treatment, conflict resolution, and dozens of other survival-related topics that represents hundreds of years of accumulated experience and cultural wisdom. But this knowledge isn't stored in books or databases that you could study. It's embedded in daily practices, passed down through hands-on training, and maintained through constant application under the demanding conditions of nomadic life. Learning these skills requires not just intellectual understanding but physical conditioning, sensory development, and cultural adaptation that would challenge even the most dedicated and capable modern person. The morning activities begin around you, and you realize that your day with the Mongol Nomads has barely started, but you're already overwhelmed by the complexity of knowledge and skills that successful nomadic life requires. The gentle sounds of animals stirring, family members beginning their daily routines, and the steps coming alive with the subtle activities of another day create a peaceful atmosphere that masks the incredible demands that the next 12 hours will place on everyone who calls this challenging environment home. And this is still only the beginning of why you wouldn't last a day with the Mongol Nomads. As the morning progresses on the Mongolian steppes, you face your next impossible challenge: participating in the daily milking routine that provides essential nutrition for the nomadic family and represents one of the most technically demanding tasks in the nomadic lifestyle. This isn't simply a matter of approaching animals and extracting milk. It's a complex process that requires intimate knowledge of animal behavior, precise timing, physical coordination, and cultural understanding that takes years to develop. The maras that must be milked each morning are not docile dairy cows accustomed to human handling. They're semi-wild horses whose cooperation must be earned through a combination of skill, patience, and understanding of equine psychology that goes far beyond anything most modern people have ever needed to develop. These maras will only allow milking under very specific conditions, and creating those conditions requires expertise that nomadic women typically spend their entire childhood and adolescence acquiring. You watch as the experienced nomadic women approach the maras with movements that seem casual but are actually precisely calculated to avoid triggering the animal's flight responses. Every gesture, every step, every change in posture is designed to communicate non-threatening intentions while maintaining the confident authority that horses respect and respond to. The positioning required for mare milking would challenge even experienced horsemen. You must approach the mare from the correct angle, establish physical contact in a way that reassures rather than alarms the animal, and maintain balance and control while performing milking motions that require both delicacy and efficiency. The mare will not stand still for this process. She'll continue moving, shifting her weight, and responding to environmental stimuli that you must learn to anticipate and accommodate. But even more challenging than the physical demands of mare milking is understanding the social dynamics that make the process possible. Mongol mares will typically only allow milking in the presence of their foals, which means that the entire process must be coordinated with full management techniques that require additional specialized knowledge. The foals must be controlled and positioned in ways that comfort the mares without interfering with the milking process. This requires understanding of mare-foal bonding behaviors, foal development patterns, and the subtle ways that human intervention can either support or disrupt these natural relationships. You attempt to participate in this morning milking routine, but your unfamiliarity with horse behavior immediately creates problems. Your movements are too abrupt, your positioning is incorrect, and your inability to read the mare's subtle behavioral signals causes her to become nervous and uncooperative. What should be a smooth, efficient process becomes a struggle that frustrates the animals, wastes time, and produces far less milk than experienced hands would have obtained. The nomadic women observe your difficulties with patient amusement, but you can see that your inexperience is creating extra work for them at a time when efficiency is crucial for completing all the tasks that must be finished before the day's herding activities begin. Even if you somehow manage to master the physical techniques of mare milking, you'd still need to understand the complex systems for processing and preserving the milk that make it a viable food source for nomadic life. Fresh mare's milk is highly perishable and can only be consumed immediately unless it's processed using traditional methods that transform it into fermented beverages and preserved dairy products that can sustain nomadic families through periods when fresh milk isn't available. The fermentation of mare's milk into arag, the mildly alcoholic beverage that serves as both nutrition and social lubricant in nomadic culture, requires knowledge of fermentation processes, temperature control, timing, and quality assessment that takes years to master. The difference between properly fermented arag and spoiled milk that could cause serious illness is determined by subtle changes in taste, smell, and texture that inexperienced people often can't detect until it's too late. But mares are only one source of milk in the nomadic economy. Sheep, goats, and cattle also provide milk that must be obtained through different techniques and processed using different methods to create the variety of dairy products that form the foundation of nomadic nutrition. Sheep milking requires understanding of sheep psychology and social behavior that's completely different from horse knowledge. Sheep are prey animals whose cooperation must be obtained through different approaches, and their milk production patterns follow different rhythms that must be understood and accommodated for successful dairy management. Goat milking presents yet another set of challenges, as goats are intelligent and independent animals that will test human authority and exploit any weaknesses in handling technique. A goat that decides not to cooperate with milking procedures can be remarkably creative in its resistance, and overcoming this resistance requires patience, skill, and sometimes physical strength that can be exhausting for inexperienced handlers. The processing of different types of milk into various preserved foods requires separate knowledge systems for each animal species. The techniques for making cheese from sheep milk are different from those used for goat or cattle milk, and each type of cheese requires different aging, storage, and quality control procedures. As you struggle with the morning milking routine, you begin to understand that successful nomadic life requires you to function as an expert in multiple animal species, each with its own behavior patterns, handling requirements, and processing techniques. The knowledge required to manage even this single aspect of daily nomadic life represents more specialized expertise than most modern people develop in their entire careers. But while you're struggling with milking techniques, the rest of the nomadic family is simultaneously managing dozens of other essential tasks that must be completed before the day's main activities can begin. The gur must be checked and maintained, equipment must be inspected and repaired, weather conditions must be assessed and plans must be made for the day's herding activities. The maintenance of the gur itself requires specialized knowledge that combines engineering, materials science, and meteorology in ways that would challenge modern technical experts. The felt panels that form the walls must be inspected for damage, adjusted for changing weather conditions, and positioned to provide optimal protection against wind, rain, and temperature variations. The wooden framework that supports the gur must be checked for stress, wear, and proper assembly. The guy ropes and stakes that secure the structure must be adjusted based on ground conditions, wind forecasts, and the planned duration of the family's stay in this location. Even the interior arrangement of the gur follows complex rules that combine practical efficiency with cultural protocols. The placement of family possessions, sleeping areas, cooking equipment, and storage spaces must accommodate the needs of multiple family members while maintaining the social hierarchies and religious observances that govern nomadic life. You watch family members making these adjustments with the unconscious efficiency of people who have performed these tasks thousands of times, but when you try to help, you discover that even simple tasks like adjusting guy ropes require understanding of tension distribution, not techniques and structural principles that you lack. The weather assessment that guides daily planning decisions requires knowledge that combines meteorology, geography, and animal behavior in ways that would challenge professional forecasters. Nomadic families must predict weather conditions not just for the immediate area, but for the routes they might travel and the locations where they might need to seek shelter if conditions deteriorate. The signs used for weather prediction include cloud formations, wind patterns, air pressure changes, animal behavior modifications, and dozens of other indicators that experienced nomads read with remarkable accuracy, but that require years of observation and cultural transmission to understand properly. You try to participate in the morning weather assessment by observing the sky and feeling the wind, but the subtle changes in cloud texture, the barely perceptible shifts in air pressure, and the minute variations in animal behavior that provide crucial forecasting information are invisible to your untrained senses. Even more challenging is understanding how weather predictions should influence the complex decisions that must be made about herding routes, grazing locations, and emergency preparations. The same weather conditions that might represent minor inconveniences in some situations could become life-threatening emergencies in others, depending on the family's location, the condition of their animals, and the availability of shelter or alternative resources. As the morning activities continue around you, you begin to realize that every task in nomadic life requires not just individual expertise, but coordination with other family members whose activities must be synchronized for maximum efficiency. The timing of milking affects the schedule for herding departures. The weather assessment influences decisions about equipment preparation. The condition of the animals determines the day's route planning and the evening's camping site selection. This coordination happens through communication systems that combine verbal discussion, nonverbal signals, and shared cultural understanding that allows family members to work together effectively even under stressful conditions. But participating in these communication systems requires cultural knowledge that goes far beyond language skills. The way information is shared, the order in which different topics are discussed, the types of input that different family members are expected to provide, and the methods used to reach consensus on important decisions all follow cultural patterns that are so deeply embedded in nomadic life that they're rarely explained to outsiders. You try to contribute to family discussions about the day's plans, but your lack of cultural context makes your input irrelevant or sometimes counterproductive. You don't understand which factors should be given priority in decision-making, which family members have authority over different types of decisions, or how the family's plans relate to their obligations to other families and to the broader tribal community. The morning sun climbs higher over the steppes, and the peaceful beauty of the grassland landscape contrasts sharply with your growing awareness of how demanding nomadic life really is. What looked like a simple, natural lifestyle from a distance reveals itself to be an incredibly complex system of knowledge, skills, and relationships that requires constant attention and expert management. The animals that seemed like picturesque elements of a pastoral scene are actually complex partners in survival whose moods, health, and behavior must be understood and managed with expertise that takes decades to develop. The beautiful landscape that appears empty and peaceful is actually filled with subtle information about weather, grazing conditions, water availability, and potential dangers that experienced nomads read constantly, but that remains invisible to untrained observers. The nomadic family members who seem to be living simple, uncomplicated lives are actually managing systems of remarkable complexity that require expertise in animal husbandry, weather prediction, equipment maintenance, food processing, social coordination, and emergency management that would challenge teams of modern specialists. As you struggle with the morning's basic tasks, you realize that the day's main activities haven't even begun yet. The herding, riding, and range management that fill the afternoon hours will require physical skills, environmental knowledge, and animal handling expertise that make the morning's challenges seem simple by comparison. The gentle sounds of the steppe morning, animals moving peacefully through the grass, family members conducting their daily routines with quiet efficiency, wind moving across the vast landscape, create an atmosphere of calm that masks the incredible complexity and constant demands of the lifestyle that has allowed these people to thrive in one of the world's most challenging environments. But for you, every moment brings new evidence of how much you don't know, how many skills you lack, and how unprepared you are for the physical, mental, and cultural demands of nomadic life. The morning activities that seemed manageable when observed from a distance reveal themselves to require knowledge and capabilities that would take years to develop even under ideal learning conditions. And this is still only the beginning of your day with the Mongol Nomads. The most demanding challenges still lie ahead, as the family prepares to move out onto the steppes for another day of herding activities that will test every aspect of nomadic expertise under conditions where mistakes can have serious consequences for both human and animal survival. The morning breeze carries the scent of grass and animals, sounds that have provided the background for nomadic life for thousands of years. But these familiar sensory experiences are now revealing themselves to be sources of constant information that guide every aspect of nomadic decision-making in ways that you're only beginning to appreciate. As you prepare to face the day's main challenges, you understand that successful nomadic life requires not just learning new skills, but developing entirely different ways of perceiving, thinking about, and relating to the natural world that surrounds and sustains human life on the steppes. As the morning activities conclude and the nomadic family prepares for the day's herding work, you face what may be the most fundamental challenge of nomadic life: learning to ride a Mongol horse competently enough to participate in the demanding activities that fill every daylight hour on the steppes. This isn't recreational horseback riding or even the advanced equestrian skills practiced in modern sports. This is a level of horse-human partnership that requires complete integration of balance, communication, and strategic thinking under conditions that would challenge even experienced riders. The Mongol horses that will carry you through the day's work are not the large, carefully trained animals familiar from modern riding programs. These are compact, hardy, semi-wild horses whose cooperation must be earned through demonstration of competence and authority, rather than through the gradual trust-building exercises used in contemporary horse training. A Mongol horse will test your riding ability within the first few minutes of contact, and if you fail to demonstrate adequate skill and confidence, the horse will simply refuse to cooperate with your attempts to direct its movement. This refusal can range from passive resistance, the horse simply ignoring your signals and doing whatever it prefers, to active challenges that can unseat inexperienced riders and potentially cause serious injuries. You approach your assigned horse with the confidence of someone who has perhaps ridden horses recreationally, but the moment you attempt to mount, you encounter the first of many problems that will plague your riding attempts throughout the day. The Mongol saddle is unlike any riding equipment you've ever used, designed for function rather than comfort and requiring specific mounting techniques that accommodate the horse's temperament and the rider's need to maintain security during long hours of demanding work. The stirrups are positioned differently than those on familiar saddles, requiring you to adjust your leg position and balance in ways that feel unstable and uncomfortable. The seat provides minimal cushioning and is shaped to distribute weight for extended riding rather than to provide the comfort that modern riders expect. Even more challenging is the lack of familiar handholds and support systems. The reins are constructed differently, the bit provides different feedback, and the overall feel of the horse-rider connection is unfamiliar in ways that make you constantly uncertain about your security and control. Your first attempts to direct the horse's movement reveal the depth of your inexperience with Mongol riding techniques. The signals that work with trained riding horses, subtle shifts in weight, gentle rein pressure, leg cues that guide the horse's direction, are either ineffective or actively counterproductive with a horse that expects clear, confident commands delivered through techniques that must be learned through extensive practice. The horse quickly recognizes your uncertainty and begins to make its own decisions about where to go and what to do, largely ignoring your attempts to influence its behavior. This creates a dangerous situation where you're mounted on an animal that you can't control, moving across terrain that presents constant hazards for inexperienced riders. But even if you somehow manage to establish basic control over your horse, you'd still face the challenge of learning to ride effectively while simultaneously managing the complex herding tasks that represent the main work of nomadic life. Mongol herding isn't simply a matter of following animals around. It requires strategic thinking, precise timing, and constant coordination with other riders to move large groups of animals across challenging terrain, while maintaining herd cohesion and preventing losses to predators or environmental hazards. The sheep that must be herded during the day's work are not domesticated animals that willingly follow human direction. They're semi-wild creatures whose natural instincts often conflict with human intentions, and managing them successfully requires understanding of sheep psychology, group dynamics, and predator-prey relationships that goes far beyond basic animal handling skills. Sheep have strong flocking instincts that can work for or against herding efforts depending on circumstances. Under some conditions, these instincts help keep the flock together and make it easier to guide large numbers of animals. Under other conditions, the same instincts can cause panic reactions that scatter the flock across miles of terrain, creating hours of difficult work to reassemble the group. Understanding which environmental factors, sounds, movements, or other stimuli are likely to trigger problematic sheep behavior requires experience that nomadic herders develop through years of observation and practice. The subtle signs that indicate a flock is becoming nervous, the environmental conditions that increase the likelihood of panic reactions, and the techniques for preventing or managing these situations are all part of the complex knowledge system that makes effective herding possible. You attempt to participate in the herding work by following the lead of experienced family members, but your lack of riding skills immediately creates problems. Your horse's erratic movement disrupts the careful positioning that effective herding requires. Your inability to predict and respond to your horse's behavior makes it impossible to maintain the precise timing that herding demands. Even worse, your inexperience with both riding and herding techniques sometimes causes you to make movements that actually interfere with the work of more experienced herders. Instead of helping to guide the sheep in the desired direction, your actions sometimes cause confusion or panic that makes the animals more difficult to manage. The experienced herders around you accommodate your inexperience with patient tolerance, but you can see that your presence is creating additional work for them at a time when efficiency is crucial for completing the day's tasks before environmental conditions change or other challenges arise. As the herding work continues, you begin to understand that effective management of sheep flocks requires not just individual riding and animal handling skills, but also complex coordination with other herders whose actions must be synchronized to achieve common goals. The positioning of different riders, the timing of movements that guide animal behavior, and the communication systems that allow herders to coordinate their efforts all require cultural knowledge and practical experience that takes years to develop. The verbal and nonverbal signals that herders use to communicate with each other during work must be clearly understood and quickly responded to. But these communication systems are embedded in cultural contexts that make them difficult for outsiders to decode. A gesture or call that seems meaningless to you carries specific information about animal behavior, environmental conditions, or tactical adjustments that experienced herders recognize and respond to automatically. Your inability to participate effectively in these communication systems makes you a liability rather than an asset to the herding team. Instead of contributing to the coordinated effort required for successful herding, you become an unpredictable element that other herders must compensate for while continuing to focus on their own demanding responsibilities. But sheep herding is only one aspect of the animal management challenges that fill nomadic workdays. The horses, cattle, goats, and camels that make up the nomadic family's wealth all require different types of management that demand separate skill sets and present distinct challenges for daily handling. The horse herds that represent the foundation of nomadic mobility and wealth require constant monitoring and management to maintain their health, prevent losses, and ensure that suitable animals are available when needed for riding, pack transport, or other specific purposes. Managing horse herds successfully requires understanding of equine social dynamics, grazing requirements, breeding cycles, and health maintenance that represents a lifetime of specialized learning. Wild stallions and mares in the herd establish complex social hierarchies that influence their behavior and movement patterns. Understanding these hierarchies and working with them rather than against them is essential for effective herd management, but recognizing and interpreting equine social behaviors requires experience that most modern people have never had the opportunity to develop. The grazing patterns of horse herds are influenced by factors including grass quality, water availability, weather conditions, predator presence, and social dynamics within the herd. Predicting and managing these grazing patterns requires knowledge that combines animal behavior, range ecology, and environmental assessment in ways that challenge even experienced animal managers. You attempt to participate in horse herd management by observing and trying to imitate the actions of experienced herders, but your lack of understanding of equine behavior makes your efforts ineffective and sometimes counterproductive. The horses quickly learn to ignore your attempts to influence their movement, and some of the more dominant animals may actually test your authority in ways that could become dangerous if not handled properly. The cattle that provide milk, meat, and leather present yet another set of management challenges that require different skills and knowledge. Cattle are large, powerful animals whose cooperation must be maintained through relationships that balance respect with authority, and mishandling cattle can result in injuries that could be serious or even fatal for inexperienced handlers. The social dynamics within cattle herds are different from those of horses or sheep, and understanding these dynamics is essential for effective management. Cattle establish hierarchies based on factors including age, size, temperament, and previous experiences with human handlers, and working successfully with cattle requires understanding and accommodating these social structures. The grazing requirements of cattle are different from those of other animals in the nomadic economy, and managing mixed herds that include cattle along with horses, sheep, and goats requires understanding of how different species' needs can be accommodated simultaneously without creating conflicts or resource competition that could damage the productivity of the entire operation. You watch experienced herders managing cattle with the same calm efficiency they bring to all their animal handling work. But when you attempt to participate, you discover that cattle are particularly sensitive to handler confidence and competence. A cow that senses uncertainty or fear in a handler can become uncooperative or even aggressive, creating situations that require immediate expert intervention to prevent injuries. The goats that provide milk, meat, and fiber present management challenges that are different from all the other species in the nomadic economy. Goats are intelligent, independent, and remarkably creative in their ability to create problems for inexperienced handlers. They're also extremely agile and capable of escaping from situations that would contain other animals, making goat management a constant challenge that requires vigilance and quick thinking. The social dynamics of goat herds are complex and constantly changing, with individual animals forming temporary alliances, challenging hierarchies, and testing the boundaries of human authority in ways that can be both amusing and frustrating for handlers who lack experience with caprine psychology. Goats are also more likely than other domestic animals to explore dangerous terrain, consume toxic plants, or get into situations that could result in injuries or deaths that represent significant economic losses for nomadic families. Preventing these problems requires constant attention and understanding of goat behavior patterns that takes years of experience to develop. As you struggle with the challenges of multi-species animal management, you begin to understand that successful nomadic herding requires you to function as an expert in several different types of animal psychology simultaneously. The knowledge and skills required to work effectively with horses don't necessarily transfer to cattle, sheep, goats, or camels, each of which requires separate expertise and presents distinct challenges. But even more demanding than developing expertise with individual animal species is learning to coordinate the management of mixed herds that include multiple species with different needs, behaviors, and requirements. The grazing patterns that work well for sheep might not be optimal for cattle. The terrain that suits horses might present problems for goats. The timing that accommodates one species' needs might conflict with another's requirements. Successful management of mixed herds requires strategic thinking that balances the needs of different species while achieving the overall goals of the nomadic economy. This strategic thinking must be combined with tactical flexibility that allows rapid adjustments when environmental conditions change, or when individual animals create problems that require immediate attention. The afternoon sun beats down on the steppes as you continue your struggle with herding activities, and you begin to understand that the physical demands of nomadic life are just as challenging as the technical skills required for animal management. Spending 8 to 12 hours a day in the saddle under often harsh environmental conditions requires physical conditioning that most modern people would find extremely difficult to develop and maintain. The constant motion of riding, the need to maintain balance and control while performing complex tasks, and the physical stress of working outdoors in variable weather conditions all contribute to levels of fatigue that would be overwhelming for people accustomed to sedentary lifestyles and climate-controlled environments. Your modern body, adapted to the comforts and conveniences of contemporary life, struggles with the physical demands of nomadic work. The muscles required for extended riding are different from those developed through most modern forms of exercise. The balance and coordination required for effective herding work demand types of physical integration that contemporary people rarely need to develop. Even more challenging is the mental stamina required to maintain focus and alertness throughout long days of demanding work. Nomadic herding requires constant attention to environmental conditions, animal behavior, and safety considerations that could have serious consequences if overlooked even briefly. The combination of physical fatigue and mental exhaustion that builds throughout the day creates conditions where mistakes become more likely and more dangerous. As your energy reserves become depleted, your ability to read animal behavior accurately, respond quickly to changing conditions, and make sound decisions about tactical adjustments all become compromised. But the experienced nomadic herders around you show no signs of the fatigue that's overwhelming you. Their lifelong conditioning for this type of work allows them to maintain high levels of performance throughout long days of demanding activity, and their cultural adaptation to nomadic life provides them with mental frameworks that make the work seem natural and sustainable rather than overwhelmingly challenging. The afternoon progresses, and you realize that the herding work that fills the middle part of the nomadic day requires not just individual skills and physical conditioning, but also understanding of the broader environmental and social contexts that influence herding strategies and tactical decisions. The weather conditions that seemed stable in the morning may be changing in ways that require adjustments to herding routes, grazing locations, or plans for evening camping sites. Reading these environmental changes and understanding their implications for animal welfare and human safety requires meteorological knowledge that combines scientific understanding with cultural wisdom accumulated over generations of nomadic experience. The condition of the grassland that provides nutrition for the animals is constantly changing based on factors including recent weather patterns, seasonal growth cycles, grazing pressure from other herds, and environmental disturbances that might not be immediately obvious to inexperienced observers. Assessing grassland quality and making decisions about grazing management requires understanding of range ecology, plant identification, soil conditions, and seasonal variations that represents another specialized area of expertise essential for successful nomadic life. The presence of other nomadic families in the area creates both opportunities for cooperation and potential sources of conflict that must be managed through diplomatic skills and cultural knowledge that goes far beyond simple communication abilities. The relationships between different nomadic families are governed by complex systems of kinship, tribal affiliation, historical relationships, and current political dynamics that influence everything from grazing rights to marriage arrangements to military alliances. Understanding these relationships and navigating them successfully requires knowledge of genealogies, tribal histories, and political developments that extend across vast geographical areas and span multiple generations of family and tribal relationships. As you struggle with the immediate challenges of herding work, you begin to understand that successful nomadic life requires awareness of and participation in social and political networks that are far more complex than anything most modern people need to navigate in their daily lives. The decisions made by your nomadic family about herding routes, camping locations, and resource use are influenced not just by immediate practical considerations, but also by their obligations to other families, their relationships with tribal authorities, and their understanding of broader political and economic developments that might affect nomadic communities across large regions. These broader considerations add layers of complexity to nomadic decision-making that make even apparently simple choices about daily activities part of larger strategic calculations that require cultural knowledge and political awareness that takes years to develop. The afternoon sun begins to lower toward the western horizon, and you realize that your day with the Mongol Nomads is far from over. The evening activities that will conclude the day's work present their own challenges and demand their own specialized knowledge and skills. The animals that have been managed throughout the day must be safely secured for the night. The family's possessions and equipment must be organized and protected, and preparations must be made for the next day's activities based on weather forecasts, animal conditions, and family obligations that require constant planning and adjustment. But even as you contemplate the challenges that still lie ahead, you're already overwhelmed by the complexity and demands of nomadic life that you've experienced so far. Every aspect of the lifestyle requires knowledge, skills, and cultural understanding that would take years to develop, and the margin for error in many situations is small enough that inexperience could have serious consequences for both individual and family survival. The gentle afternoon breeze carries the sounds and scents of the steppes, animals moving peacefully across the grassland, the distant calls of herders coordinating their activities, the subtle environmental signals that guide nomadic decision-making, creating an atmosphere of peaceful productivity that masks the incredible complexity and constant demands of the lifestyle that has sustained nomadic peoples for thousands of years. As you continue your impossible day with the Mongol Nomads, you understand that you've barely begun to comprehend the true challenges that nomadic life presents to anyone who lacks the cultural knowledge, practical skills, and physical conditioning that this demanding lifestyle requires. As the afternoon progresses and the herding activities continue across the vast steppes, you encounter what may be the most psychologically challenging aspect of nomadic life. The constant awareness that survival depends entirely on your ability to read and respond appropriately to environmental conditions that can change rapidly and unpredictably, often with little warning and potentially catastrophic consequences for anyone who fails to recognize and adapt to these changes quickly enough. The Mongolian steppes that appear so peaceful and stable from a distance are actually one of the world's most dynamic and potentially dangerous environments, where weather conditions can shift from pleasant to life-threatening within hours, where seasonal changes can make previously safe areas completely uninhabitable, and where the margin for error in environmental assessment is often measured in minutes rather than hours or days. You begin to notice that the experienced nomadic herders around you are constantly monitoring environmental conditions with an intensity and sophistication that goes far beyond anything you've ever needed to develop. They're not just casually observing their surroundings. They're continuously processing dozens of streams of environmental information and integrating that data into constantly updated assessments of current conditions and future possibilities. The quality of light, the direction and strength of wind patterns, the behavior of insects, the movements of birds, the condition of vegetation, the temperature variations throughout the day, and dozens of other environmental indicators are all being read and interpreted as part of a comprehensive understanding of current conditions and likely future developments. This environmental monitoring isn't just scientific observation. It's survival intelligence that directly influences decisions about animal management, route selection, camping locations, and emergency preparedness. The nomadic herders are essentially functioning as highly sophisticated weather forecasting and environmental assessment systems whose accuracy often exceeds that of modern meteorological services. You attempt to participate in this environmental monitoring by paying closer attention to the conditions around you, but you quickly discover that your untrained senses can't distinguish between the subtle variations in environmental conditions that provide crucial information to experienced observers. The changes in wind direction that might indicate approaching weather systems are too subtle for you to detect. The variations in cloud formations that could predict precipitation, temperature changes, or severe weather developments are beyond your ability to interpret. The behavioral modifications in animals and insects that often provide early warning of environmental changes are invisible to your inexperienced eyes. Even when family members point out specific environmental indicators, you struggle to understand what you're supposed to be seeing or how these observations should influence practical decisions about herding activities, route planning, or safety preparations. The cumulative effect of your inability to participate effectively in environmental monitoring is a growing sense of vulnerability and dependence that becomes increasingly stressful as the day progresses. While the experienced herders around you are confidently making decisions based on their reading of environmental conditions, you're essentially functioning blindly, unable to assess risks or anticipate changes that could affect your safety and survival. This dependence on others for environmental assessment is particularly challenging because nomadic life often requires rapid decision-making in situations where there isn't time for extensive consultation or explanation. When environmental conditions change quickly, experienced herders can assess the situation and respond appropriately within minutes, but your inability to read environmental signals means that you're always reacting to decisions made by others rather than participating in the decision-making process. But environmental monitoring is just one aspect of the broader challenge of understanding and adapting to the complex rhythms of nomadic life that are synchronized with natural cycles and seasonal patterns that modern people rarely need to consider in their daily activities. The timing of nomadic activities isn't determined by clocks or calendars, but by environmental conditions, animal behavior patterns, and seasonal cycles that create natural schedules that must be followed for successful survival. Understanding these natural rhythms and adapting your activities to align with them requires cultural knowledge that takes years to develop and constant attention to environmental cues that provide timing information. The daily schedule of herding activities, for example, is influenced by factors including animal feeding patterns, temperature variations, wind conditions, and the availability of water and shelter. These factors change constantly based on seasonal cycles, weather patterns, and local environmental conditions, which means that the optimal timing for various activities is always shifting and must be constantly reassessed. You discover that the seemingly simple question of when to move animals to new grazing areas involves complex calculations that consider grass quality, water availability, weather forecasts, animal energy levels, and strategic positioning for the next day's activities. These calculations require understanding of range ecology, animal psychology, and environmental prediction that represents another specialized area of nomadic expertise. The evening timing for bringing animals back to secure areas near the family's camp involves similar complex considerations. Too early, and valuable grazing time is lost. Too late, and the animals may be vulnerable to predators or difficult to manage in poor lighting conditions. The optimal timing requires assessment of factors including predator activity patterns, animal behavior cycles, and environmental conditions that affect visibility and safety. As you attempt to understand and adapt to these natural rhythms, you realize that nomadic life requires a completely different relationship with time than modern people are accustomed to. Instead of following artificial schedules imposed by social conventions, nomadic families must synchronize their activities with natural cycles that don't accommodate human preferences or convenience. This synchronization with natural rhythms extends to seasonal patterns that influence every aspect of nomadic life over longer time periods. The annual cycles of grass growth, animal breeding, weather patterns, and resource availability create seasonal schedules that determine when families should move to different grazing areas, when certain types of work should be accomplished, and when preparations should be made for challenging periods like winter months or dry seasons. Understanding these seasonal patterns and planning accordingly requires knowledge that combines meteorology, ecology, animal husbandry, and resource management in ways that represent generations of accumulated cultural wisdom. The decisions made during any particular day or week are influenced by considerations that extend months or even years into the future. The afternoon activities that seem focused on immediate animal management needs are actually part of longer-term strategies that consider seasonal grazing patterns, breeding cycles, and resource conservation needs that will affect the family's survival prospects throughout the coming year. You begin to understand that successful nomadic life requires not just short-term tactical skills, but also strategic thinking that operates on multiple timescales simultaneously. The immediate decisions about animal management must be consistent with weekly plans for resource use, monthly strategies for seasonal positioning, and annual cycles of migration and resource management. This multi-scale strategic thinking requires cultural knowledge and environmental understanding that goes far beyond anything most modern people need to develop. The planning horizons that nomadic families must consider extend far beyond the timeframes that dominate contemporary life, and the consequences of strategic mistakes can affect family survival for months or years. As the afternoon sun begins to sink lower in the western sky, you encounter another fundamental challenge of nomadic life: the constant need to maintain and repair equipment and possessions under field conditions using limited resources and traditional techniques that require specialized knowledge and skills. The saddles, bridles, ropes, and other equipment that make herding activities possible are subject to constant wear and stress that requires ongoing maintenance to prevent failures that could have serious consequences for both human and animal safety. But equipment maintenance in nomadic conditions isn't simply a matter of replacing worn parts or making minor adjustments. It requires the ability to manufacture, repair, and modify equipment using traditional materials and techniques. The leather that forms the basis of much nomadic equipment must be prepared, treated, and worked using traditional methods that combine chemistry, materials science, and craftsmanship in ways that require years of apprenticeship to master. Understanding how to select appropriate animal hides, process them into usable leather, and work the leather into functional equipment requires knowledge that most modern people have never had the opportunity to develop. The metalwork required for equipment maintenance involves blacksmithing skills that combine metallurgy, engineering, and craftsmanship in ways that require specialized training and experience. The ability to heat, shape, and temper metal components using traditional techniques is essential for maintaining the tools and equipment that nomadic life depends on. Even the textile work required for equipment maintenance requires specialized knowledge of fiber processing, spinning, weaving, and finishing techniques that produce materials with the strength, durability, and weather resistance that nomadic equipment demands. You watch family members performing routine equipment maintenance with the casual efficiency of people who have been doing this type of work their entire lives. But when you attempt to help with simple tasks like rope repair or leather conditioning, you discover that even apparently basic maintenance work requires knowledge and skills that you lack. The techniques for splicing rope, conditioning leather, adjusting metal fittings, and maintaining textile components all require understanding of materials properties, stress distribution, and environmental factors that affect equipment performance. These techniques can't be learned quickly or easily. They require hands-on experience under the guidance of experts who can demonstrate proper methods and correct mistakes before they result in equipment failures. The consequences of equipment failure in nomadic conditions can be much more serious than similar problems in modern environments where replacement parts and professional repair services are readily available. A broken saddle, a failed rope, or a damaged bridle can create immediate safety hazards and make it impossible to continue essential herding activities until repairs are completed. But equipment maintenance is just one aspect of the broader challenge of resource management that dominates nomadic life. Everything that the family needs for survival must be carried with them, maintained in functional condition, and used efficiently to ensure that essential resources remain available when needed. The food storage and preparation systems that sustain nomadic families require knowledge of food preservation, nutrition, and cooking techniques that are adapted to the constraints and opportunities of mobile life. The traditional methods for preserving meat, processing dairy products, and preparing nutritious meals using limited cooking equipment and fuel sources represent another specialized area of nomadic expertise. The water management systems that ensure adequate hydration for both humans and animals require understanding of water sources, storage methods, and purification techniques that are essential for preventing illness and maintaining health under challenging conditions. The fuel management systems that provide heat for cooking and warmth for shelter require knowledge of fuel sources, combustion efficiency, and safety procedures that prevent accidents while maximizing the utility of available resources. As you observe the complex resource management systems that sustain nomadic life, you begin to understand that survival in this environment requires a level of self-sufficiency and resource efficiency that modern people rarely need to develop. The nomadic family must be able to maintain themselves independently for extended periods without access to the support systems and specialized services that contemporary life depends on. This self-sufficiency extends to medical care, emergency response, conflict resolution, and dozens of other areas where modern people typically rely on professional services and institutional support. The nomadic family must be able to handle medical emergencies, resolve disputes, manage crises, and solve problems using only the resources and knowledge that they carry with them. The responsibility for maintaining this comprehensive self-sufficiency is distributed among family members according to cultural patterns that assign different types of expertise to different individuals based on age, gender, ability, and training. But every family member is expected to possess basic competency in multiple areas and to be able to assume additional responsibilities when circumstances require. The afternoon light begins to take on the golden quality that indicates the approach of evening, and you realize that your day with the Mongol Nomads is moving toward its conclusion. But the challenges that remain are as demanding as those you've already struggled with. The evening activities that will secure the animals, organize the camp, and prepare for the night ahead require their own specialized knowledge and present their own potential difficulties. But even as you contemplate the challenges that still lie ahead, you're already exhausted by the physical demands, mental complexity, and constant stress of trying to participate in a lifestyle that requires knowledge, skills, and cultural understanding that you simply don't possess. The nomadic family members around you show no signs of the fatigue that's overwhelming you. Their lifelong adaptation to this demanding lifestyle has given them the physical conditioning, mental resilience, and cultural knowledge that make nomadic life sustainable and even satisfying for people who have developed the capabilities that this environment requires. The gentle afternoon breeze that carries the sounds and scents of the steppes continues to provide environmental information that guides nomadic decision-making, but you remain largely unable to interpret these natural signals in ways that could contribute to your survival or to the welfare of the nomadic family that has accepted you as a temporary member. As you continue your impossible day with the Mongol Nomads, you understand that nomadic life represents one of humanity's most remarkable adaptations to challenging environmental conditions, but also one of the most demanding lifestyles ever developed, requiring capabilities that modern people rarely have the opportunity or necessity to develop. As evening approaches on the Mongolian steppes, you face what may be the most psychologically demanding aspect of your day with the nomadic family. The gradual realization that the peaceful conclusion of daily activities requires the same level of expertise, vigilance, and coordination that has characterized every other aspect of nomadic life, but with the added complexity that mistakes made during evening routines can have consequences that extend throughout the night and into the following day. The transition from active herding work to evening camp activities isn't simply a matter of stopping work and relaxing. It's a complex process that requires careful assessment of animal conditions, environmental factors, and security considerations that determine how safely and successfully the family will pass the vulnerable hours of darkness when visibility is limited and various threats become more serious. The animals that have been managed throughout the day must be evaluated for health, fatigue, and behavioral indicators that could affect their safety and well-being during the night. This evaluation process requires the same intimate knowledge of animal behavior that has been essential throughout the day, but applied to different types of assessment that focus on longer-term needs rather than immediate management requirements. The horses that have carried riders and equipment throughout the day must be examined for signs of stress, injury, or exhaustion that could affect their ability to perform effectively in emergency situations that might arise during the night. A horse that seems fine during active work might be developing problems that will become serious if not addressed before the animal is left unattended for extended periods. You attempt to participate in this evening animal assessment by observing the examination techniques used by experienced family members, but your lack of knowledge about equine health indicators makes your observations largely meaningless. The subtle signs of fatigue, the early indicators of potential lameness, and the behavioral changes that might suggest developing health problems are all invisible to your untrained eyes. Even when family members demonstrate specific examination techniques or point out particular indicators, you struggle to understand what you're supposed to be looking for or how these observations should influence decisions about animal care and security arrangements for the night. The sheep, goats, and cattle that make up the family's wealth must undergo similar assessments, each requiring different types of knowledge and presenting different challenges for evening management. The grazing behavior that seemed normal during daylight hours must be reevaluated in the context of nighttime risks that include predation, weather exposure, and the animal's tendency to wander away from secure areas when not under direct supervision. The decision-making process that determines where animals should be positioned for the night, how they should be secured, and what level of supervision they will require involves complex calculations that consider predator activity patterns, weather forecasts, terrain features, and the availability of family members for night watch duties. These decisions can't be made arbitrarily or based on convenience. They require assessment of real risks and implementation of security measures that are appropriate for current conditions. The consequences of poor evening animal management can include losses to predators, injuries from environmental hazards, or animals wandering so far from camp that recovering them requires days of searching across vast areas of steppe terrain. You observe the evening animal management process with growing appreciation for its complexity, but also with increasing awareness of your inability to contribute meaningfully to the decision-making or implementation processes. Your lack of knowledge about animal behavior, predator patterns, and environmental risks makes you essentially useless for the planning and coordination that evening activities require. But animal management is only one aspect of the evening routines that conclude each day of nomadic life. The family's equipment, possessions, and shelter must also be organized and secured in ways that protect them from weather, theft, and damage while ensuring that essential items remain accessible for emergency use during the night. The ger that provides shelter for the family requires evening maintenance and adjustment that takes into account changing weather conditions, temperature variations, and wind patterns that might develop during the night. The felt panels, wooden framework, and securing systems that keep the ger functional must be inspected and adjusted based on environmental forecasts and structural considerations that require understanding of both engineering principles and local weather patterns. The arrangement of possessions within the ger follows cultural protocols that combine practical efficiency with social and religious requirements. The placement of sleeping areas, storage spaces, and essential equipment must accommodate the needs of multiple family members while maintaining the hierarchical arrangements and spiritual observances that govern nomadic domestic life. You attempt to help with ger maintenance and organization, but your unfamiliarity with both the technical requirements and the cultural protocols makes your assistance more hindrance than help. The adjustments that seem simple when performed by experienced hands require understanding of structural principles and cultural conventions that you lack. The evening meal preparation that concludes the day's activities represents another complex process that requires knowledge of food preservation, cooking techniques, and nutritional requirements that are adapted to the constraints and opportunities of nomadic life. The traditional methods for preparing nutritious meals using limited ingredients and cooking equipment require skills that combine chemistry, nutrition, and resource management in ways that take years to master. The dairy products that form the foundation of nomadic nutrition must be processed and prepared using techniques that ensure food safety while maximizing nutritional value and flavor. The meat that provides essential protein must be prepared in ways that make efficient use of every part of the animal, while creating meals that are satisfying and culturally appropriate. The fermented beverages that serve both nutritional and social functions must be prepared and served according to protocols that combine practical considerations with cultural traditions and social hierarchies that govern family interactions. You attempt to participate in meal preparation activities, but your unfamiliarity with traditional cooking methods and ingredients makes your contributions minimal and sometimes counterproductive. The techniques for working with traditional cooking equipment, processing raw ingredients, and achieving the flavors and textures that nomadic families expect require knowledge and skills that can't be learned quickly or easily. Even simple tasks like maintaining cooking fires require understanding of fuel management, combustion control, and safety procedures that are essential for preventing accidents while maximizing cooking efficiency. The traditional methods for managing cooking fires using available fuel sources require experience with materials and techniques that modern people rarely encounter. As the evening activities continue around you, you begin to understand that the conclusion of the active workday doesn't represent a reduction in the complexity or demands of nomadic life. Instead, it represents a transition to different types of activities that require different knowledge and skills, but are equally essential for family survival and well-being. The social activities that accompany evening meals and conclude the day's work serve important functions that go beyond simple entertainment or relaxation. These social interactions maintain family relationships, transmit cultural knowledge, and provide opportunities for planning and coordination that are essential for the family's continued success. The storytelling, music, and conversation that fill evening hours serve educational functions that teach younger family members about nomadic traditions, historical events, and cultural values that they will need to understand for successful participation in nomadic society. These social activities also provide opportunities for discussing plans, sharing information, and making decisions about future activities that require family coordination. The cultural protocols that govern evening social activities are as complex and demanding as those that structure work activities during the day. The topics that are appropriate for discussion, the order in which different family members are expected to contribute to conversations, and the ways that decisions are reached through group consultation all follow patterns that require cultural knowledge and social sensitivity that take years to develop. You attempt to participate in evening social activities, but your unfamiliarity with cultural protocols and your lack of knowledge about nomadic traditions make your contributions awkward and sometimes inappropriate. The conversations that seem casual and informal are actually following complex social rules that you don't understand, and your attempts to participate often reveal your ignorance in ways that are embarrassing for both you and your host family. The evening progresses, and you realize that the psychological challenges of nomadic life may be more demanding than the physical and technical challenges you've been struggling with throughout the day. The constant requirement to function effectively in situations where your knowledge is inadequate, your skills are insufficient, and your cultural understanding is limited creates levels of stress and insecurity that become increasingly difficult to manage. The nomadic family members around you demonstrate remarkable patience and tolerance for your inadequacies, but you can see that your presence creates additional work and stress for them at times when efficiency and harmony are important for family well-being. Instead of contributing to family success, you've become a burden that requires constant accommodation and supervision. This awareness of your negative impact on family functioning creates psychological pressure that adds to the physical fatigue and mental exhaustion that have been building throughout the day. The realization that you're not just failing to contribute positively, but are actually creating problems for people whose survival depends on efficient cooperation, becomes increasingly difficult to tolerate. But even more challenging than the awareness of your inadequacy is the growing understanding of how completely dependent you've become on the knowledge, skills, and goodwill of others for every aspect of your survival. In your normal environment, you possess sufficient knowledge and resources to function independently and to contribute meaningfully to group activities. In the nomadic environment, you've been reduced to a state of dependence that is both psychologically uncomfortable and practically dangerous. This dependence isn't just temporary inconvenience that could be resolved through brief training or gradual adaptation. The knowledge and skills required for successful nomadic life represent cultural achievements that have been developed and refined over thousands of years of experience in one of the world's most challenging environments. The animal husbandry techniques, environmental assessment abilities, equipment maintenance skills, food processing knowledge, social coordination capabilities, and dozens of other areas of expertise that nomadic life requires can't be learned quickly or easily. They require not just intellectual understanding, but physical conditioning, sensory development, and cultural adaptation that would take years or decades to achieve even under ideal learning conditions. The evening activities that conclude your day with the Mongol nomads continue around you with the same quiet efficiency that has characterized all aspects of nomadic life, but your appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of this lifestyle is now combined with profound respect for the remarkable capabilities that nomadic people have developed for survival in their challenging environment. The sounds of the evening steps, animals settling for the night, family members concluding their daily activities, wind moving across the vast grassland, create an atmosphere of peaceful conclusion that masks the incredible complexity and constant vigilance that successful nomadic life requires. As darkness approaches and the day's activities move toward their conclusion, you understand that your impossible day with the Mongol nomads has provided you with insights into one of humanity's most remarkable adaptations to challenging environmental conditions, but also with humbling awareness of how much knowledge, skill, and cultural understanding successful survival in this environment requires. The nomadic lifestyle that seemed romantically appealing from a distance has revealed itself to be a sophisticated and demanding way of life that requires capabilities that modern people rarely have the opportunity or necessity to develop. The peaceful beauty of the steppes masks environmental challenges that require constant attention and expert management for successful survival. The gentle evening breeze that carries the familiar scents and sounds of nomadic life continues to provide environmental information that guides family decision-making, but you remain largely unable to interpret these natural signals in ways that could contribute to your survival or to the welfare of the family that has accepted you as a temporary member. As the day moves toward its conclusion, you realize that nomadic life represents not just a different way of organizing human activities, but a fundamentally different relationship with the natural environment that requires knowledge, skills, and cultural understanding that represent some of humanity's most remarkable achievements in environmental adaptation. As night falls over the Mongolian steppes, you encounter what may be the most profound challenge of your entire day with the nomadic family. The realization that darkness doesn't bring rest or respite from the demands of nomadic life, but instead introduces an entirely different set of responsibilities, risks, and requirements that are every bit as complex and demanding as the daylight activities you've already struggled with throughout the day. The transition from day to night on the steppes isn't simply a matter of reduced visibility and cooler temperatures. It represents a fundamental change in the environmental conditions, threat patterns, and survival strategies that govern every aspect of nomadic life. The knowledge and skills that were essential during daylight hours must be supplemented with additional expertise that addresses the unique challenges and opportunities that darkness brings to steppe survival. The security considerations that were manageable during daylight hours become much more complex and critical after dark. The predators that pose threats to nomadic animals become more active during night hours, and their hunting behaviors change in ways that require different types of vigilance and different defensive strategies from nomadic families. The wolves that represent the most serious predator threat to nomadic herds are primarily nocturnal hunters whose pack behaviors and attack patterns are specifically adapted to nighttime conditions. Understanding wolf behavior, recognizing signs of wolf presence, and implementing effective defensive measures requires knowledge that combines animal psychology, predator ecology, and tactical planning in ways that take years of experience to develop. You listen as family members discuss the night's security arrangements, but your inability to recognize or interpret the environmental signs that indicate predator activity makes your participation in security planning largely meaningless. The tracks, scents, vocalizations, and behavioral indicators that experienced nomads use to assess predator threats are invisible to your untrained senses. Even more challenging is understanding how predator threats should influence decisions about animal positioning, guard duties, and emergency response procedures. The strategic thinking required to balance animal security with human safety while maintaining the flexibility needed for rapid response to changing conditions represents another area of nomadic expertise that you lack. As night falls over the Mongolian steppes, you encounter what may be the most profound challenge of your entire day with the nomadic family. The realization that darkness doesn't bring rest or respite from the demands of nomadic life, but instead introduces an entirely different set of responsibilities, risks, and requirements that are every bit as complex and demanding as the daylight activities you've already struggled with throughout the day. The transition from day to night on the steppes isn't simply a matter of reduced visibility and cooler temperatures. It represents a fundamental change in the environmental conditions, threat patterns, and survival strategies that govern every aspect of nomadic life. The knowledge and skills that were essential during daylight hours must be supplemented with additional expertise that addresses the unique challenges and opportunities that darkness brings to steppe survival. The security considerations that were manageable during daylight hours become much more complex and critical after dark. The predators that pose threats to nomadic animals become more active during night hours, and their hunting behaviors change in ways that require different types of vigilance and different defensive strategies from nomadic families. The wolves that represent the most serious predator threat to nomadic herds are primarily nocturnal hunters whose pack behaviors and attack patterns are specifically adapted to nighttime conditions. Understanding wolf behavior, recognizing signs of wolf presence, and implementing effective defensive measures requires knowledge that combines animal psychology, predator ecology, and tactical planning in ways that take years of experience to develop. You listen as family members discuss the night's security arrangements, but your inability to recognize or interpret the environmental signs that indicate predator activity makes your participation in security planning largely meaningless. The tracks, scents, vocalizations, and behavioral indicators that experienced nomads use to assess predator threats are invisible to your untrained senses. Even more challenging is understanding how predator threats should influence decisions about animal positioning, guard duties, and emergency response procedures. The strategic thinking required to balance animal security with human safety while maintaining the flexibility needed for rapid response to changing conditions represents another area of nomadic expertise that you lack. The night watch duties that ensure family and animal security during vulnerable dark hours require not just vigilance and alertness, but also the ability to distinguish between normal nighttime sounds and activities, and those that might indicate approaching threats or developing problems that require immediate response. The acoustic landscape of the steppes at night is filled with sounds that carry crucial information about environmental conditions, animal behavior, and potential threats, but interpreting this acoustic information requires experience and cultural knowledge that you don't possess. The calls of night birds, the movements of small animals, the vocalizations of domestic animals, and the subtle sounds of wind and weather all contribute to an information-rich soundscape that experienced nomads read constantly throughout the night. You attempt to participate in night watch duties by staying alert and listening carefully to the sounds around you, but your inability to distinguish between significant and insignificant sounds makes your vigilance largely ineffective. The nocturnal sounds that might indicate approaching predators, developing weather problems, or animal distress are indistinguishable to you from the general background noise of nighttime steppe life. Even more problematic is your lack of knowledge about appropriate responses to various types of nighttime threats or emergencies. The procedures for dealing with predator attacks, severe weather developments, or animal health crises during night hours require quick decision-making and coordinated action that depends on understanding of protocols and techniques that you haven't learned. The darkness that limits visibility also creates navigation challenges that make even simple movements around the camp area potentially dangerous for inexperienced people. The terrain features, obstacles, and hazards that were visible during daylight hours become invisible in darkness, and moving safely requires familiarity with the camp layout and awareness of potential dangers that you lack. The nomadic family members around you move through the darkness with confidence and efficiency that demonstrates their lifelong adaptation to nighttime conditions, but your movements are hesitant and uncertain, requiring constant attention that prevents you from contributing effectively to night watch duties. The temperature changes that often accompany nighttime hours on the steppes present additional challenges that require understanding of thermal regulation, clothing systems, and shelter management that are specifically adapted to nomadic conditions. The dramatic temperature differences between day and night that are common in steppe environments can create conditions that are uncomfortable or even dangerous for people who aren't prepared with appropriate clothing and shelter arrangements. The traditional clothing systems used by nomadic families are designed to accommodate these temperature variations through layering techniques and material choices that provide flexibility for changing conditions. But understanding how to use these clothing systems effectively requires knowledge that you don't possess. The felt and leather garments that provide insulation and weather protection function differently from modern synthetic materials, and using them effectively requires understanding of how traditional materials respond to temperature changes, moisture, and wear patterns that affect their performance. You struggle with temperature regulation throughout the night, finding it difficult to maintain comfort as conditions change, and your inability to use traditional clothing systems effectively makes you more vulnerable to weather-related health problems that could affect your ability to function effectively during the following day. The sleep patterns that must be maintained during night hours are also different from those that modern people are accustomed to. Nomadic families typically divide night hours into watches that ensure continuous security while allowing family members to get adequate rest. But participating in these watch systems requires understanding of sleep management techniques that are adapted to nomadic conditions. The ability to fall asleep quickly under potentially stressful conditions, to wake up alert and ready for action when watch duties begin, and to maintain alertness during long periods of nighttime vigilance requires sleep discipline and stress management skills that take practice to develop. You find it difficult to sleep soundly under the unfamiliar conditions of nomadic life, and your interrupted sleep patterns make it even more difficult to maintain alertness during the night watch periods when your vigilance is needed for family security. The psychological challenges of nighttime nomadic life are also significant for people who aren't accustomed to the isolation, vulnerability, and constant awareness of potential threats that characterize night hours on the steppes. The vast darkness that surrounds the small circle of family safety creates an environment that can be psychologically overwhelming for people who are accustomed to the security and comfort of modern living conditions. The awareness that you're completely dependent on the knowledge and skills of others for your safety and survival becomes even more intense during night hours when threats are more serious and escape options are more limited. The psychological pressure of knowing that mistakes or failures in vigilance could have serious consequences for the entire family creates stress levels that are difficult to manage. But even as you struggle with the challenges of nighttime nomadic life, you begin to understand that the night hours also provide opportunities for cultural activities and social interactions that are essential for maintaining the family relationships and cultural traditions that sustain nomadic communities. The storytelling traditions that preserve nomadic history, cultural values, and practical knowledge are often shared during evening and night hours when family members gather together for warmth, security, and social connection. These storytelling sessions serve educational functions that transmit essential cultural information from older to younger family members. But they also provide entertainment and social bonding that strengthen family relationships. The songs and music that accompany evening social activities serve similar functions, preserving cultural traditions while providing emotional expression and social connection that help family members cope with the stresses and challenges of nomadic life. The conversations that take place during evening hours provide opportunities for family members to share information, discuss problems, and coordinate plans for future activities. These conversations follow cultural protocols that ensure that all family members have opportunities to contribute to family decision-making while maintaining the hierarchical relationships that provide structure and authority for family governance. You attempt to participate in these evening cultural activities, but your unfamiliarity with nomadic traditions and your inability to contribute meaningfully to family discussions make your participation limited and sometimes awkward. The cultural knowledge that these activities assume and the social skills that they require represent another area of nomadic expertise that you lack. The night progresses, and you realize that the challenges of nomadic life continue throughout the 24-hour cycle without significant breaks or periods of reduced demand. The knowledge, skills, and cultural understanding that are required for successful nomadic survival must be maintained and applied constantly, regardless of time of day or environmental conditions. The expertise that nomadic families possess represents not just individual capabilities, but collective knowledge that has been developed and refined over generations of experience in one of the world's most challenging environments. This knowledge is maintained through constant practice, cultural transmission, and adaptation to changing conditions that require continuous learning and development. The cooperation and coordination that make nomadic family life possible depend on shared understanding of roles, responsibilities, and procedures that are so deeply embedded in nomadic culture that they function almost automatically for people who have been raised in nomadic families, but that represent complex systems of social organization that outsiders couldn't master quickly or easily. As the night deepens and the darkness settles over the vast steppes, you begin to understand that your day with the Mongol Nomads has provided you with only a glimpse of the complexity and sophistication of nomadic life. The challenges you've struggled with represent just a fraction of the knowledge and skills that successful nomadic survival requires, and the cultural adaptation that would be necessary for long-term survival in this environment would require fundamental changes in your worldview, values, and ways of relating to the natural environment. The peaceful sounds of the night steppes, the gentle movements of animals, the quiet conversations of family members, the subtle sounds of wind across the grassland create an atmosphere of calm that masks the constant vigilance, complex decision-making, and expert knowledge that nomadic life requires. The nomadic family members around you continue their night watch duties with the same quiet competence that has characterized all their activities throughout the day, but you remain largely unable to contribute effectively to the security and survival activities that ensure family safety during the vulnerable hours of darkness. The night air carries scents and sounds that provide continuous environmental information to experienced nomads, But these natural signals remain largely meaningless to you despite your efforts to develop the sensory awareness and interpretive skills that nomadic life requires. As you struggle with the challenges of nighttime nomadic life, you understand that the difficulties you've encountered represent not just individual inadequacies, but fundamental differences between the knowledge systems, cultural values, and survival strategies that have been developed for nomadic life and those that characterize modern urban existence. The night continues, and you realize that your impossible day with the Mongol Nomads is moving toward its conclusion. But the challenges that have tested your endurance, adaptability, and cultural understanding throughout the day have also provided you with profound appreciation for one of humanity's most remarkable achievements in environmental adaptation and cultural development. As the deepest hours of night settle over the Mongolian steppes, you encounter what may be the most psychologically and spiritually challenging aspect of your entire experience with nomadic life. The profound realization that successful survival in this environment requires not just technical knowledge and physical skills, but also a fundamental transformation of your relationship with uncertainty, risk, and the natural forces that govern human existence in ways that modern civilization has largely eliminated from contemporary experience. The pre-dawn hours bring a quality of stillness and vulnerability that intensifies all the challenges you've been struggling with throughout your impossible day with the Mongol Nomads. This is the time when the accumulated effects of physical exhaustion, mental stress, and cultural displacement combine to create psychological conditions that test the limits of human adaptability and resilience. Your modern mind, conditioned by the predictability and security of contemporary life, struggles to accept the levels of uncertainty and risk that are simply normal aspects of nomadic existence. The constant awareness that survival depends on factors largely beyond human control, weather patterns, predator behavior, animal health, and dozens of other variables that can change without warning, creates anxiety levels that are difficult for people accustomed to modern security systems to tolerate. The nomadic family members around you demonstrate remarkable psychological resilience in the face of uncertainties that would overwhelm most contemporary people. Their ability to function effectively while accepting high levels of risk and uncertainty represents another area of nomadic expertise that goes beyond technical skills to encompass fundamental attitudes about human existence and the relationship between human beings and the natural environment. You observe this psychological resilience with growing appreciation for its sophistication, but also with awareness that developing similar mental toughness would require not just practice and training, but fundamental changes in your worldview and emotional responses that would take years or decades to achieve. The spiritual dimensions of nomadic life become more apparent during the quiet pre-dawn hours, when the vast emptiness of the steppes creates an environment that encourages contemplation of humanity's place in the larger, natural order. The nomadic worldview that has sustained these communities for thousands of years includes spiritual beliefs and practices that help people find meaning and purpose in a lifestyle that modern people might find overwhelmingly difficult. The animistic beliefs that attribute spiritual significance to natural phenomena, weather patterns, and animal behaviors provide nomadic families with frameworks for understanding and relating to environmental forces that might otherwise seem random and threatening. These spiritual beliefs aren't just abstract philosophical concepts. They provide practical guidance for decision-making and emotional support for coping with the stresses and uncertainties of nomadic life. The rituals and ceremonies that mark important transitions, seasonal changes, and life events in nomadic communities serve functions that combine spiritual expression with practical community building and cultural transmission. These spiritual practices help maintain the social cohesion and cultural identity that make nomadic communities viable over long periods of time. You observe some of these spiritual practices during your time with the nomadic family, but your lack of understanding of their cultural context and spiritual significance makes your participation superficial and your appreciation limited. The spiritual knowledge that sustains nomadic communities represents another area of cultural expertise that would require years of learning and cultural adaptation to understand properly. The pre-dawn hours also bring the final phase of nighttime animal management activities that ensure that the herds are secure and healthy as morning approaches. The assessment of animal condition and behavior during these early morning hours requires the same detailed knowledge of animal psychology and health indicators that has been essential throughout the day, but applied to different conditions and different priorities. The horses that must be prepared for another day of demanding work require evaluation for rest quality, health status, and readiness for the physical challenges that daylight hours will bring. The subtle behavioral indicators that show whether horses have rested adequately, recovered from the previous day's exertions, and are prepared for continued work require observational skills and animal knowledge that you've struggled with throughout your day with the nomadic family. The other animals in the nomadic economy also require pre-dawn assessment and management that ensures their welfare while preparing for the day's activities. The sheep, goats, cattle, and camels that represent the family's wealth must be evaluated for health, security, and positioning relative to the day's planned activities. You attempt to participate in these pre-dawn animal management activities, but your continued inability to read animal behavior accurately or to understand the implications of your observations for practical management decisions makes your contributions minimal and sometimes counterproductive. The weather assessment that guides planning for the coming day becomes even more critical during pre-dawn hours when environmental conditions for the entire day must be predicted based on subtle signs and indicators that experienced nomads can read with remarkable accuracy. The quality of the pre-dawn light, the characteristics of wind patterns, the behavior of birds and insects, and dozens of other environmental indicators provide information that influences major decisions about routes, activities, and safety preparations. The meteorological knowledge that nomadic families possess combines scientific observation with cultural wisdom accumulated over generations of experience with steppe weather patterns. This knowledge allows them to make weather predictions that often exceed the accuracy of modern forecasting systems, but it requires observational skills and environmental understanding that take lifetimes to develop. You observe the pre-dawn weather assessment process with growing respect for its sophistication, but also with continued awareness of your inability to contribute meaningfully to the data gathering or decision-making processes that determine how the family will approach the challenges of another day. The equipment and shelter maintenance that must be completed before daylight activities begin represents another area of pre-dawn activity that requires technical knowledge and practical skills that you've struggled with throughout your time with the nomadic family. The ger that has provided shelter throughout the night must be inspected and adjusted for the day's activities, and equipment that will be needed for herding work must be checked and prepared. The rope, leather, and metal components that make nomadic equipment functional are subject to constant stress, and wear that requires ongoing attention to prevent failures that could have serious consequences for family safety and success. The maintenance techniques that keep this equipment functional under harsh conditions require knowledge of materials properties and repair methods that most modern people have never needed to develop. You watch family members performing routine equipment maintenance with their characteristic efficiency and competence, but your attempts to help with even simple maintenance tasks reveal your continued lack of knowledge about traditional materials and techniques. As the pre-dawn hours progress and the first hints of daylight begin to appear on the eastern horizon, you realize that your impossible day with the Mongol Nomads is approaching its conclusion, but the challenges you've encountered have fundamentally changed your understanding of human capability, cultural adaptation, and the relationship between human communities and their environments. The nomadic lifestyle that seemed romantically appealing from the perspective of modern comfort and security has revealed itself to be one of humanity's most demanding and sophisticated adaptations to challenging environmental conditions. The knowledge, skills, and cultural understanding that successful nomadic life represent achievements that are every bit as remarkable as the technological and social innovations that characterize modern civilization. The peaceful beauty of the steppes that has provided the backdrop for your day's experiences masks environmental challenges that require constant attention, expert knowledge, and cultural wisdom that has been developed and refined over thousands of years of human experience in one of the world's most demanding environments. The nomadic family that has accepted you as a temporary member possesses collective knowledge and individual capabilities that represent some of humanity's most impressive achievements in environmental adaptation and cultural development. Their ability to thrive in conditions that would challenge or defeat most modern people demonstrates the remarkable flexibility and resilience that human communities can develop when faced with demanding survival challenges. But your day's experiences have also revealed the profound differences between the knowledge systems, cultural values, and survival strategies that have been developed for nomadic life and those that characterize contemporary existence. The skills and understanding that you possess, which are adequate or even superior for modern life, are largely irrelevant or counterproductive for nomadic survival. The interdependence, community cooperation, and cultural integration that make nomadic life possible require types of social relationships and shared understanding that are very different from the individualism and specialization that characterize modern society. The environmental awareness and natural integration that nomadic life requires represent ways of relating to the natural world that modern civilization has largely abandoned in favor of technological control and environmental manipulation. The psychological resilience and spiritual integration that sustain nomadic communities through challenging periods require mental toughness and cultural frameworks that most contemporary people would find difficult to develop or maintain. As the pre-dawn darkness begins to give way to the first subtle signs of approaching daylight, you understand that your day with the Mongol Nomads has provided you with insights into alternative ways of organizing human life that are both humbling and inspiring. The challenges you've struggled with throughout the day have demonstrated the remarkable sophistication and effectiveness of nomadic adaptations to environmental challenges. But they've also revealed how much knowledge, skill, and cultural understanding successful survival in this environment requires. The gentle pre-dawn breeze that carries the familiar scents and sounds of nomadic life continues to provide environmental information that guides family decision-making, but you remain largely unable to interpret these natural signals in ways that could contribute to survival or to the welfare of the community that has accepted you. The first faint light of dawn begins to touch the eastern horizon, and you realize that your impossible day with the Mongol Nomads is moving toward its conclusion. The experiences you've had and the challenges you've encountered have provided you with profound appreciation for one of humanity's most remarkable cultural achievements, but also with humbling awareness of how much you would need to learn and change to function successfully in this demanding but rewarding way of life. The sounds of the pre-dawn steppes, animals stirring as daylight approaches, family members beginning to prepare for another day's activities, wind moving across the vast grassland, create an atmosphere that combines peacefulness with purposeful preparation for the challenges and opportunities that another day will bring. As you prepare to conclude your impossible journey into nomadic life, you understand that the experiences you've had represent not just exposure to a different lifestyle, but contact with alternative ways of understanding human existence, community relationships, and the possibilities for human adaptation to environmental challenges that remain relevant and valuable even in our modern world. As the first light of dawn breaks across the endless expanse of the Mongolian steppes, you find yourself at the conclusion of what has been perhaps the most challenging and transformative 24 hours imaginable. A complete day and night with Mongol nomads whose mastery of survival skills, environmental knowledge, and cultural wisdom represents one of humanity's most remarkable achievements in adaptation to demanding natural conditions. The approaching dawn brings with it a profound mixture of relief and revelation. Relief that you have somehow managed to survive this long in an environment that has challenged every assumption you held about human capability, survival skills, and the relationship between human communities and their natural environments. But also the deeper revelation that what you've experienced represents just the surface of a way of life that would require fundamental transformation of your entire worldview, value system, and understanding of what it means to be human in the natural world. The exhaustion that permeates every aspect of your being isn't simply physical fatigue from a day of demanding activities under harsh conditions. It's the deeper weariness that comes from discovering that nearly everything you thought you knew about survival, community cooperation, environmental awareness, and practical problem-solving is inadequate or irrelevant for the challenges that nomadic life presents on a daily basis. Your modern knowledge and skills, which serve you well in contemporary environments, have proven to be not just insufficient but often counterproductive for nomadic survival. The technological solutions, institutional support systems, and specialized services that make modern life manageable are completely unavailable in the nomadic context, where survival depends entirely on personal knowledge, community cooperation, and direct relationship with natural environments. The nomadic family that has shared their day with you possesses knowledge and capabilities that represent thousands of years of cultural development and environmental adaptation. Their understanding of animal behavior, weather patterns, grassland ecology, equipment maintenance, food processing, social coordination, and emergency management represents expertise that would challenge teams of modern specialists. But more remarkable than their technical knowledge is their integration of this expertise into a coherent lifestyle that provides not just survival, but meaning, community, and sustainable relationship with the natural environment. The nomadic way of life represents a complete system of human organization that addresses not just material needs, but also social, psychological, and spiritual requirements for human flourishing. The challenges you've encountered throughout your day with the nomads, the complexity of animal management, the demands of environmental assessment, the requirements of equipment maintenance, the intricacies of social coordination, and the psychological demands of accepting uncertainty and risk, are not separate problems to be solved individually, but integrated aspects of a comprehensive lifestyle that must be mastered as a whole. This integration requires not just learning new skills, but developing entirely different ways of thinking about human existence, community relationships, and environmental interaction. The individualism that characterizes modern life must be replaced with community interdependence. The technological solutions that dominate contemporary problem-solving must be replaced with direct engagement with natural processes. The security and predictability that modern people expect must be replaced with acceptance of uncertainty and risk as normal aspects of human existence. The psychological transformation that would be required for successful adaptation to nomadic life goes far beyond learning new techniques or adjusting to different physical conditions. It would require fundamental changes in your relationship with control, security, comfort, and individual autonomy that would challenge the basic assumptions about human existence that modern culture has taught you to take for granted. The nomadic worldview that sustains these communities through challenging periods and difficult conditions includes spiritual beliefs, cultural values, and social practices that provide meaning and purpose in ways that are very different from modern approaches to these fundamental human needs. The connection with natural cycles, the integration with animal partners, the dependence on community cooperation, and the acceptance of environmental uncertainty all contribute to ways of understanding human existence that are both ancient and profoundly relevant to contemporary challenges. Your day's experiences have revealed not just the sophistication of nomadic adaptations, but also some of the limitations and costs of modern lifestyle choices. The technological solutions that make contemporary life comfortable and convenient have also created distance from natural processes, dependence on complex systems that most people don't understand, and social arrangements that often prioritize individual autonomy over community cooperation. The environmental control that modern technology provides has created expectations for security and predictability that may be unrealistic given the natural variability and uncertainty that characterize environmental conditions throughout most of human history. The specialization that makes modern economies efficient has also created dependencies and limitations that reduce individual capabilities and community resilience. The nomadic alternatives that you've encountered during your day on the steppes don't represent simple solutions to modern problems, but they do demonstrate that human communities can organize themselves in ways that are more directly integrated with natural processes, more dependent on community cooperation, and more accepting of environmental uncertainty, while still achieving remarkable levels of cultural sophistication and individual fulfillment. The morning light grows stronger across the vast grassland, and the sounds of the nomadic family beginning another day of challenging but rewarding activities provide a peaceful conclusion to your impossible journey into one of humanity's most demanding and sophisticated lifestyles. The animals that must be managed throughout another day of herding activities stir with the approach of daylight, and the experienced nomadic herders begin their morning assessments of animal condition, weather prospects, and plans for the day's activities with the same quiet competence that has characterized all their work throughout your day with them. But now you understand that this apparent simplicity masks incredible complexity, and that the peaceful efficiency of nomadic activities represents mastery of knowledge and skills that would challenge the most capable modern people. The environmental awareness, animal expertise, equipment maintenance capabilities, social coordination skills, and psychological resilience that nomadic life requires represent some of humanity's most impressive achievements in adaptation to challenging conditions. The cultural wisdom that has sustained nomadic communities for thousands of years includes not just practical knowledge about survival techniques, but also social institutions, spiritual beliefs, and value systems that provide frameworks for meaningful human existence under conditions that would overwhelm most contemporary people. The cooperation and mutual support that make nomadic family life possible demonstrate alternative approaches to social organization that prioritize community welfare over individual autonomy, while still providing opportunities for personal fulfillment and cultural achievement. The integration with natural environments that nomadic life requires represents ways of relating to the natural world that provide both practical benefits and spiritual satisfaction that are often missing from modern relationships with environmental systems. As the dawn progresses and the great cycle of nomadic life prepares to begin again, you realize that your day with the Mongol Nomads has provided you with insights that extend far beyond simple exposure to a different lifestyle. You've encountered alternative ways of organizing human existence that challenge many of the assumptions about progress, development, and human potential that dominate contemporary thinking. The nomadic achievements that you've witnessed during your impossible day represent not primitive or backward approaches to human organization, but sophisticated and effective adaptations to environmental challenges that remain relevant and valuable even in our modern world. The knowledge systems, social institutions, and cultural values that sustain nomadic communities offer insights into human capabilities and alternative approaches to persistent human challenges that could inform contemporary efforts to create more sustainable, resilient, and meaningful ways of life. The environmental awareness and natural integration that nomadic life requires provide examples of how human communities can maintain productive relationships with natural systems while meeting human needs for security, prosperity, and cultural development. The community cooperation and mutual support that make nomadic survival possible demonstrate social arrangements that balance individual capabilities with collective welfare in ways that could inform modern efforts to address social isolation, community fragmentation, and institutional dysfunction. The acceptance of uncertainty and risk that nomadic life requires offers perspectives on resilience and adaptability that could help contemporary people develop better strategies for coping with environmental change, economic instability, and social transformation. The spiritual integration and cultural meaning that sustain nomadic communities through difficult periods provide examples of how human beings can find purpose and fulfillment in ways that don't depend on technological control or material accumulation. The gentle morning breeze carries the familiar scents and sounds of nomadic life across the vast steppes, and the peaceful beauty of the grassland landscape provides a fitting conclusion to your journey into one of humanity's most remarkable cultural achievements. The nomadic family that has shared their day with you continues their daily activities with the same quiet competence and cultural integration that has sustained their way of life for thousands of years. But now you understand that their achievements represent not just successful adaptation to challenging conditions, but also profound insights into alternative possibilities for human existence. Your impossible day with the Mongol Nomads concludes where it began, with you as an observer trying to understand a way of life that operates according to principles very different from those that govern contemporary existence. But now your understanding has deepened into appreciation for the complexity, sophistication, and wisdom that nomadic life represents. The sun rises higher over the endless grassland, and the sounds of another day beginning in the nomadic cycle, animals being prepared for herding activities, family members coordinating their work, and the general purposeful activity of a community that has mastered the challenges of survival in one of the world's most demanding environments, provide a peaceful and inspiring conclusion to your journey. As you prepare to return to your own time and place, you carry with you not just memories of an extraordinary experience, but also deeper understanding of human potential, alternative approaches to persistent challenges, and the remarkable achievements that human communities can accomplish when they develop knowledge, skills, and cultural wisdom that are integrated with natural processes and community cooperation. The nomadic way of life may not provide simple solutions to modern problems, but it does demonstrate that human beings are capable of remarkable adaptation, that communities can organize themselves in ways that are both sustainable and fulfilling, and that the relationship between human existence and natural environments can be both productive and spiritually satisfying. Rest peacefully, knowing that you've experienced one of humanity's most impressive achievements in cultural adaptation and environmental integration, and let your dreams carry you gently through the vast, beautiful, and endlessly fascinating story of human creativity and resilience in the face of challenging but ultimately rewarding natural conditions. Sleep well, and let the peaceful sounds of the Mongolian steppes, the gentle movement of animals across endless grassland, the quiet activities of nomadic families living in harmony with their environment, and the eternal rhythms of natural cycles that have sustained human life for thousands of years, guide you into restful dreams of the remarkable diversity and impressive achievements of human civilization in all its many forms,